Hey everybody, welcome back to the 42nd episode of Taps and Patience. This is the episode where we invite people on and they don't show up. Yeah, wow, Harrison's blurry too if you're watching the video. Anyway, My name is AJ with Design the Everything. I am here with the blurry Harrison of Precision Ingenuity. This is also in video form if you are a person who watches video, which is why Harrison's blurry. Hi Harrison, how you doing?
Doing good. Hopefully my camera's not blurry and it's just the internet connection. Because I am at a different location.
It just went out of focus. It just decided that the curtains were more interesting or something like that.
Oh, fair enough. So,
I have news. Can I start with my news?
Yeah, let's start with your news.
I made 3 pallets of carabiners in a row and no broken tools. I just had to replace a drill because it was dull and leaving an onion skin. But we are making carabiners reliably.
Okay, so walk me through this. What's changed? What's improved?
So basically everything has changed.
Okay.
One, I have moved from that one big aluminum pallet to smaller steel pallets. Did I talk about any of this
last time? You talked about the steel pallets, but it was still, I think, a full-size steel pallet. So are you breaking it up into smaller pieces now?
Yeah, so I have now standardized on pallets that are 6 inches wide, and then I can make them whatever length I want parametrically in Fusion. So all of my pallets are 6 inches wide. I bought a big bar of 2x6 steel, so 2 inches thick, 6 inches wide. And if you're wondering why I bought that size, it's because it was a drop they had at my Alro. So they could have ordered me 1-inch steel, which is what I was originally looking for. But it was actually cheaper to buy the 2-inch than it was to buy the 1-inch. So I just went with 2-inch. And I've kind of regretted that because it's a very heavy. But anyway, so I went from a 14x12 or something like that pallet to a 6x8 pallet. And by reducing the size of my titanium, the material movement issue is basically solved. So
Sweet.
No more material movement. And then after that, there was a little bit of fine tuning, like when I needed to leave an onion skin, when I didn't need to leave an onion skin. On the Not for Climbings, I ended up leaving an onion skin and adding a Op2 to remove that onion skin. But for the most part, it's just working now. Oh, and I also went way more conservative on a lot of my contour tool paths, which adds a lot of cycle time. But right now, I don't really care because it's working reliably. Let's see. Oh, I also, and this was not for productivity reasons, but I switched on doing the contour from a 3mm end mill to a 2.5mm end mill. Oh, okay. And that is only because I was using I was originally going to do some of the cutting with a 2.5mm end mill. So I bought like 10 of them and then I changed my mind and I didn't need them anymore. So I have a bunch of tools I need to use up. So I'm until I run out of tools, I'm going to be doing that with a 2.5mm end mill. But I changed around the tool paths so I can go back to a 1/8 inch end mill on the outside contour. And then it'll be a 3mm end mill on the inside contour. But when I go back to that 1/8 inch end mill, that'll save me some cycle time.
Oh, that's good. So how many are you getting because your pallet's smaller?
I'm getting 8 at a time. Though I can do 8 Op1s and 8 Op2s as of today because I just made a second pallet. So they're separate pallets, but I have an Op1 pallet and I have an Op2 pallet.
That's awesome. Are you still changing everything inside the machine or can you take it on and off and set it up outside the machine?
If I so chose to, I could remove the pallets from the machine and set them up offline. That was one of my problems with my previous design is that the material covered the mounting holes. And so now I can set it up offline if I'm running other parts. Because the new material is so much smaller, there's so many less screws and stuff. And so it's much faster to do inside the machine. That's what I've been doing. But if I needed to, I could pop them off and, put my 4th axis back on, for example. Actually, Sweet. Because my pallets are smaller, I can fit my 4th axis anyway, which is good because then I can start rolling on pens again.
But heck yeah.
It took a while. Like I basically took all weekend to get everything sorted out and get some of the details working. But I am running carabiners efficiently.
That is probably a very good feeling.
Yes. And tomorrow we'll be caught up on online orders. We were a little bit behind for the weekend because I was rebuilding my entire system. And then we can start really pushing into the not so tactical orders.
So how's your website doing? Still kicking? Still doing like as good as it was?
So so background for anybody who's forgotten in the last week. We were doing the website and it was like $300 a month, $300 a month, $400 a month, $200 a month, and or excuse me, a week, $200 a week, $300 a week. And then we started advertising and we got to like $400 a week, $500 a week. And then we got better at advertising and then it went to $1,000 a week for a couple weeks. And we last week we were down to 800. Though interesting, we doubled our advertising budget and we went down $200 in sales.
Do you think any of that has to do with Father's Day?
I do. I think we just didn't have a long enough sample size at the higher rate of sales, or excuse me, at the lower rate of advertising. But we put our advertising budget back down, and I don't know, it seems to be doing just as well. So I think with the audiences that we had chosen on Facebook, like the audiences that we were choosing to market to, we basically like $20 a week was enough to saturate that, or $20 a day, excuse me, was enough to saturate that.
Mm-hmm.
And by when we doubled the amount of advertising budget, we noticed that the same people were seeing our ads a bunch more. And it seems like
Gotcha.
Facebook was just out of people to show the ad to. And so it was
Interesting.
prioritized. Like when you don't have very much of a budget, I think Facebook tries to be very efficient and only show it to the people that it thinks are actually going to buy. When
Mm-hmm.
you have more budget, it's like, okay, we'll show it to other people who maybe don't buy it. So
Gotcha. Just to get eyeballs in front of it.
yeah. So we were, I've probably said a couple different numbers here, a couple different times. So the total budget we were running before was $20 a day. And that was split into two different ads that were identical, but targeting different audiences. And so that's why I've probably gone back and forth between saying like $10 a day and $20 a day. The $10 per ad or per audience seems to be the magical number. And if we do that, it runs really efficiently. If we double it to $20 per audience per day, then we make exactly the same number of sales. So
Currently.
yeah,
Unless
currently.
unless you change up your sales strategy or products, or there's a holiday or something coming up. Because I bet if there's another big holiday where your sales start to uptick and then you go ahead and bump it at that point, then you might double pretty
Yeah.
quickly. And then
It,
maybe after you've doubled doing that, maybe when you click that down, if it slows down again, maybe they'll slow down to a higher level because you'll have more
that's
sales
possible.
going.
Yeah. There's a
Ideally.
bunch of things to try. So test number one is if we do a ad that is different but targeted the same people showing the same products, like just a different variation of the ad. Like, does that do the same thing, or is it like adding another 50% of sales?
So, what does this ad look like?
It looks a lot like an Instagram story. It's technically a reel, but it starts off with like basically me holding the carabiner in the camera and being like, "Hey, look at this carabiner," and then I just talk about the carabiner. Like it's designed to look like a impromptu story or a reel.
Gotcha. Okay.
So very low production value, which is actually intentional. It was pretty highly scripted, and like it took me like probably 30 or 40 tries, but it is designed to look like a impromptu Instagram.
Gotcha.
But it doesn't
Yeah.
hide that it's an ad. For the record, I will never do that. It is very clear that like I am trying to sell you this carabiner.
Gotcha. That's sweet.
But
So,
one of the interesting things is we had two different versions of this ad, and I did a first one where we just kind of winged it, and that was the first ad we were playing with, where we went from like 200 to $300 or $400 in sales, and then I re-recorded the ad with basically covering almost all of the same points, but we redid like how I like the holding the carabiner right in front of the camera at the beginning. I think that was the big thing,
mhm.
and just like the what you call the blocking, like how you moved, and it made a huge difference in the ad. So almost the
Interesting.
exact same words, but how it was presented was just slightly different.
Yeah, that is the interesting thing when you get into marketing. It's all a game.
Yeah.
So, that's funny. Do you is your next product going to be your next Kickstarter? Is that where you're going to start doing ads with, or do you have any pre-existing products that you would like to advertise?
So the orange slice is our best seller on Etsy, and I was thinking about revamping that and getting or doing normal ads for that, because if it sells as well on our store as it does on Etsy, that would be pretty big.
Yeah.
And let's see, the pen I think will be the big one. I think we'll do another, $800, $1,000 a week in pens once we get those advertised.
Oof. That's
So
exciting.
that's what I'm hoping, at least. Oh,
I
and we
really,
have the not so tactical carabiner. We haven't done ads for that yet because
yeah,
we're not selling them in our store yet.
yeah. I need to see you get up to a point where you're succeeding with products, because that is an area that, like I keep saying, I enjoy the job shop stuff. I'm doing really well in the job shop stuff. I can fully load the shop up with job shop stuff currently, but I don't trust job shop stuff in the long run. I really want to get that product stuff going at some point. So,
I mean, your service as a job shop is it can be just as much as a product as anything
it,
else, but
it can be, but I have goals to do. I don't know if I'd split it up into a different, and I've probably mentioned this before on the podcast, but I'd probably split it up into two different divisions at some point.
mhm.
And I'd like to get into products of much larger in nature, probably involved a lot of outsourcing and different things, like some actual, like, big products. And to get there, I really want to cut my teeth doing smaller single items, and then kind of gain experience and build up to something big, rather than starting with something big and going under. So
Yeah.
I want to work my way up, which is actually an interesting conversation I had with a couple salesmen that stopped by our shop the other day. They were trying to sell us a 3D scanner, which I
Mhm.
think I talked a little bit about last week. Did I? Okay. Yeah, that's what I thought. And my deal with them is, it was a really expensive scanner, but like we started out with the Tormach. We started out with the Tormach, and then we moved up to a Haas, and then we'd like to move up to, we'd like to upgrade the Tormach to something bigger at some point. Same thing with the scanners. Probably not going to start up with something that big, but I'd like to start out maybe with $1,000, $2,000 scanner that can get us some experience and some exposure, and then work our way up from there. Same with the products. Start out with something small, get our experience, and then work our way up the stack as we go. So that's kind of been our strategy so far, and it has worked pretty well so far. We keep as we get comfortable, we continue to take on more work, and we continue to grow. So hopefully we can keep that natural progression, because I see a lot of companies that like can get huge spurts too fast, and it can kill the business. And I kind of understand that. So, because
Same.
I've had some pretty big growth spurts, and those growth spurts have almost killed us in some ways. So,
So it's kind of like when I was getting all of these online orders, and so on top of those online orders, I'm trying to fulfill the not so tactical orders. But two, like my systems just sucked, and I wasn't prepared to
mm-hmm.
handle the volume of orders.
Yeah.
And again, granted, if it wasn't for the not so tactical, I could have gotten there sooner.
Mm-hmm.
But like even like basically we're averaging about 5 carabiners a day at this point. And like
Mm-hmm.
that shouldn't be hard at all. But
Yeah.
just because like we weren't in a position to tackle that, I mean, like this has been a rough couple of weeks.
Yep. Yep. So we're on the same boat right now. We have a lot more complicated product we're making for someone else, and we've been riding the struggle bus getting that up and operational. But because it is for someone else, it's put a lot more pressure to not put off the problems. So in a way, it's been good for us, but it has also put a lot of pressure on us internally to deliver what we said we could get done. So there's a lot of pluses and minuses on it, but it's been very stressful for the last few weeks. So,
I understand that.
but it's exciting because I'm extremely proud of what we've been able to accomplish and what the final product looks like. And I think it's going to continue to get better and we're going to continue to get more efficient at making it. And then hopefully it can become something that we're doing in the background as a continuous sale. So we've already talked to the guy, and he's kind of agreed to a certain amount per week.
Oh,
So
nice.
so now we're to the point where it's going to take up maybe 1 day to a half a day a week, and we have the other 4 days, 4.5 days to do machining. So
Yeah, that works out really well.
yeah. So if we can keep that up, then we'll be doing pretty good. So excited about that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Did I mention I'm sitting here playing with it? Did I mention that I finished the design, at least in CAD, of the revised pen?
You messaged me on Instagram about something that you were working on, but
Yes.
I hadn't heard anything yet, other than that you had some success.
So you'll like this. I have figured out how to get rid of the little tiny custom pin that we needed that would have an A80 thread, a
Mm-hmm.
0-80 thread. What we're going to do is the bolt part is going to be two pieces and that
Okay.
will screw into each other, and the button part, or the thumb stud, with lack of a better word, is just going to be a rod, and it will slide into a hole on the button, and then you'll tighten the other end of the button against it to hold that in place.
Interesting. So this is gonna be have like an over sleeve or something. Like I guess I'll have to see the design. That sounds
Yeah,
really cool.
I can show you later. I don't have it pulled up on Fusion right now, or I would show it now. The idea is kind of derived from how Smooth Precision Pens, formerly known as Urban Survival Gear, holds theirs on, but they use a really long little Allen wrench from the inside to tighten it. But we're just
Hmm.
going to unscrew our button halfway, and that means you don't have to have tools to replace the cartridge.
That is really nice.
So we got rid of the teeny tiny threads and replaced them with bigger ones. Then we got rid of the need to ship a tool with the pen. So, and I finished the redesign of the slot. I just need to prototype it for the people who are not watching on video. The pen uses a bolt action like mechanism, except it's not actually a bolt action mechanism. It is a push button mechanism, just like a normal clicky pen, except you click the pen on and then you slide the bolt sideways to, oh, I literally have one of the pens here. So you click the pen on and then you swipe to turn it off. This is one of the earlier prototypes.
Oh,
And
okay. Is that an Ultim one?
yes, the black Altum. And this mechanism is all driven by a pin that follows a slot there. It's kind of hard to see, but
That's
for those
cool.
of you who are on video, you can kind of get an idea.
And you're gonna do two sizes, right?
Of pens, yeah, we have the mini size and the big size. I guess I haven't actually done the design for the mini size yet, and I should do that.
Yeah. I'm excited for those minis. Those minis like were just such a small, fun fidget factor.
Yeah, I'm really happy with at least how the blanks turned out, and so we'll see how they translate to being an actual pen. But
Yeah.
I just, now that I'm caught up a little bit on the carabiners and like I'm just in production mode, I can start moving on to the R&D stuff.
That's nice. Let's see here. Been a busy week last week. Had a lot of quoting and POs coming in. So
Very
super excited
nice.
about that. It was quiet, which is probably good because we had a lot of the product stuff we were working on. And then last week everything kind of came online and I was literally quoting for about 2 or 3 days straight, it felt like. Just constantly emails going off, and I think I ended up doing 12 or so quotes, and then we got 4 or 5 POs last week, and then I got 3 POs today. So,
Nice. What does
so,
your quoting process look like on your end?
so on our end, it depends on. We try to have everyone send quotes to us to sales at precisioningenuity.com. That hits both me and Weston. Typically, I'm the primary quote guy. And so I will try to gather all of the information that I can. We have a OneDrive that anytime anyone sends us anything, the first thing we do is we go into monday.com and we create a job number for it. And then we fill out a brief description and we'll put contact information if it's a new customer, name, phone number, email, whatever. If it's an existing customer, then we have a drop down box that we do for existing customers. And so I'll select which customer it is. And I'll leave it in a unbid state where it's just in a unbid but registered. At that point, I will go into OneDrive and we have a job folder template
Mm-hmm.
that has everything that we need on the inside that we keep for every job. I will copy that folder and I will go into the 2023 library. I will filter down to the customer, or if it's a new customer, we have a folder called individual. So we treat everyone as an individual if they're a new customer, unless their email signature or something says they're from a big corporation, at which point we'll set them up a custom folder.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's an unknown, like I get a random text or a random email and I have no idea who it is, I just put it in individual. We'll put it in there. We'll create a job number that matches the one in Monday.com, because that's Mondays where we track the shop work, but OneDrive is where we store all the information. So we make sure those two are linked. And then in there, there's an accounting folder and a customer document folder. And anything that the customer sends goes into the customer documents. And so we keep track of all the stuff the customer sends us. And then I have an Excel sheet that I use to quote it all out. And depending on if they sent me PDFs, or they sent me 3D models, or if they're just sent me literally a word description of what they're wanting, I'll try to figure out the best way to quote all that out. And the way our quote sheet is set up, it's kind of got two sections. It's got everything that we do internally and everything we have to do externally. And everything that we have to do externally, we typically just have a X percentage markup. And then everything we do internally, we have a lot more flexibility with. So,
Okay.
and that kind of depends on the volume that we're talking about, how that all plays out. And then we also have built into the sheet, if they want it rushed, we have the ability to tack on rush fees and all that kind of other stuff. And I would say our quoting's been we got that dialed in pretty on point. I will oftentimes, depending on what the parts are, sometimes I'll compare to Xometry. If I have a good working relationship with the customer and I'm unsure of a quote, after I've sent it off, I'll follow up with them the next day or two later and be like, hey, how'd we land? Like, I hadn't heard from you, hadn't got a PO yet. Just wanted to see where we way high, way low. Like, and usually we're within like the middle of the pack, middle bottom. So definitely got room to go up most of the time. But there are a couple times where we're just like way high from what the customer was thinking, but I still would have a hard time believing that anyone else could do it any cheaper.
Yeah.
So.
Do you ever do any sort of comparison, like, this job actually cost us $1,000, but we quoted that it would cost us $800, and then like reevaluate some of your costs on your spreadsheet?
Not always, but yes and no. So, no, we don't sit down and look at all of the numbers, typically, depending on the job. However, the one thing we always do look at is the external costs. So we very rarely check our internal costs, but the one thing we try to make sure is that our external costs, on average, are less than 50% of the job cost. And so anytime we have jobs that go over 50%, and they were not planned. So there are some jobs where it's just like the material cost versus the part complexity. Your material is going to be over 50% of the job no matter what you do. Otherwise, you're uncompetitive. Those jobs we typically try not to get, and we bid those jobs high because we're doing the profit first. And so I can always look at my net 30 and compare it to the net 30 bills that we owe. And as long as the net 30 bills we owe is under 50% of the net 30 coming in, then I know that the business is doing stuff well.
Okay.
So we're not really looking at our labor as much. We try to track our labor, like we'll try to write it down on the sheets and then we'll compare it to what we quoted. But usually what we're trying to check is make sure we're not overrunning our actual costs out the door. As we get employees and whatnot, we'll become more focused on internal costs, but because it's just me and Weston right now, what matters is, did we get the job done on time and did we not overrun our costs externally? So those are the two factors we're focusing on right now.
Yeah. One of the things, so I have a spreadsheet that I use to estimate cash flow going forwards and keeping track of like bank account balances and all of that stuff. And I just went through another little improvement cycle on that. And so now it estimates cost of goods sold, which is not something it did before. Back when we were doing like $100 worth of carabiners a week, it was like, okay, we just have all these in inventory. And, at some point in the future, or if we do a big order of material, we'll just tack it on there. But now that we're actually going through product and materials at a reasonable rate, it's like, okay, I need to actually have this projected into my cash flow. So I added that in, and I have started adding I have a column for the difference between the projected cash that we should have on hand at the beginning of every week and like what we actually had. And what that essentially does is cover, like it shows when we are spending money that we don't know or think that we are spending it. So I'm trying to think of a good example of. Okay, like if we're scrapping a bunch of carabiners, for example, that would show up there, where our cost of goods sold is not accounting for how many carabiners are actually being sold because we have so much waste. It's just, I don't
Gotcha.
know. I've only had that in there for a week or two, and it's, I don't know. I think it'll be helpful as we're going forwards because we do always spend more money than we think we do, which
Yeah.
I suppose I knew, but
Yeah. Well, we're trying to be more and more granular as time goes on, and we're always redefining what our spreadsheet shows.
yeah,
And so we got it set up now where we have a margin offset that we can do for any uncertainty. So what we try to do in an
yeah,
ideal world, this is what we do. We quote our external costs and we try to get that to where we have it all accounted for and there's X amount of markup on that. Typically between 10 and 30%. That's kind of the range that we try to hit for our external cost markups. And then we try to quote it out as much times it's going to take us to do internally. And Weston is a lot more picky about making sure that those are set correctly. I sometimes will play with those numbers a little bit to try to make sure I got a good price. But Weston is a lot more like, what's it actually going to take? And I'll be like, well, I think if I do this, I can shave a little bit of time here. And if I do this, I can shave a little bit of time here. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I try to I have a better sense of where the price needs to be. And Weston has a better sense of how much time is it actually going to take. And so I can tell by looking at a price and a part if it's going to be high or not for the customer's perspective versus what Weston typically does. And so there's a little bit of conflict there sometimes because we'll be like, we need more money in that, and I'm like, yeah, we do, but the customer's probably not going to buy it if we go too much higher than this. So, this is where we need to be, and we're still making money, but this at least guarantees that we're going to get it. And as we get better reputation and busier, I'll be more willing to go a little bit higher just because I can justify it at that point. We're busy enough that I can be like, okay, we have the work. If we don't get this one, it's not the end of the world. And so we've been slowly ratcheting up our prices, but so far no one's been complaining. And I've been comparing prices, and we're still kind of in that bottom middle pack. So there's still room to go up, but as people are getting more comfortable with us, I'm more comfortable going up. So
at my last job, when I built out a quoting worksheet, it was a pretty in-depth quoting worksheet, but I had two factors in there. And one was what I called the risk factor,
mm-hmm.
which basically was just a multiplier added to the materials. So I think it was, if it was if I viewed it as a 100% risk, it would just double the material price.
Mm-hmm.
As like, if I don't know, if it's something weird and materials that are likely to go wrong, like we would want the ability to buy more of them, or like if it's if we think we're going to need more setup pieces. So we had that risk factor, which is basically just a multiplier on the materials. And then we had I don't remember what I called it. It was probably something more diplomatic, but it was basically like a job suckiness factor.
Mm-hmm.
And if it was like sometimes we had parts that were just like, put material on laser, press button, ship parts to customer. And those people got a discount on our overall profit margin. And then there were jobs that were like, super intricate and, would go through 12 different stations and,
Yeah.
potentially bottleneck us in other places, or have an opportunity cost from other jobs. And so those had profit margin added on.
Yeah. So here, let me pull up my actual sheet and I'll look at it and tell you some of the stuff that's on it. So like I said, we kind of have it broke up into two sections, and then in those two sections, at least for our internal labor, we have it broke up into more. So at the very beginning, we have any kind of mental time. So that'll be your CAD, your CAM. If we have to design anything, if we have to do DXFs, if we have to do whatever, that's mental time. Then we'll have the material prep zone. So that'll be for bandsawing material, just general material prep. Then we have our machining processes, and all of these different areas. At least in the beginning, it's mostly labor. As we get deeper into it, it'll be man and machine, and then sometimes it's just machine. So for CNC milling, for example, if I have a job, we pretty much know that anytime we do a job, we're going to have about a half hour setup if it's a new part. So that's automatically built into every part, more or less, within reason. That's kind of just a generic. It's going to take us a half hour to get everything set up. And then if it's a part that's going to run for a long time, and then like every 2 minutes we need to go, or every 30 minutes, we're going to spend 2 minutes flipping the part or changing it out. I'll try to get those ratios right. So sometimes it can be heavy machine time, sometimes it's heavy labor, sometimes they're equal. Just kind of really depends. And so I can do all that work there. Then we'll get into our finishing section, and this will be for deburr, sandblast, laser engraving, tumbling, Cerakote, basically anything that we're doing as a post processing, where we're going in and we're cleaning stuff up. We have a fabrication stuff for welding, even though it's something we don't offer. I do have it built into my sheet. We have an area for assembly. So if there's any, like if we're building an assembly and we're trying to screw things together or tear things apart, like on some guns, for example, if people want to do barrels and they bring us the whole gun, we'll try to estimate how long is it going to take to disassemble the gun to get down to the barrel, do the barrel threading, and then reassemble everything. So we'll use that section. We got a 3D printing, inspection, and then shipping. And then that's all internal costs. And then on the other side, it's just a generic list of external costs, the amount and the cost per piece, and then a generic markup. And then underneath that, I kind of have a layout box that talks about internal cost, external costs, and profit. And it kind of talks about my labor internal external costs, my machine internal external, and my materials internal external. And kind of gives me a breakdown of where is most of the time spent or money spent on that particular part. And it's an area that I can quickly look at it, and I can look at the part and I can go, if it's a simple part, but my labor is really high, then I've messed up something. Or if it's a really complex part, but my machining time is really low, or my machine costs really low, then there's something probably wrong with my sheet. So it's just kind of a quick glance, is my costs where they need to be. And then I can break it down to how much, if it's a multi-piece order, I'll put in how many pieces I'm doing, and it'll automatically calculate the total cost and your cost per piece. And then I have my 2 percentages that I can change. It's kind of similar to you. It's your markup for your material. It's kind of that risk factor that you were talking about with how much extra material you're doing. And then I have a margin, it's kind of the risk management for the internal labor side. And so one does it for the material and one does it for my internal costs. And I can adjust either one of those percentages depending on what I think of the job. And then something that's unique to us on our quote sheet is we actually have the breakdown of when that job hits our income account. So we have Opex, owner's pays, taxes, and profit. And so that's built into our sheet. And so I can look at how I've quoted the job, how it should go into all those different bank accounts. And I have red flags that'll pop up if any of those percentages are out of order or out of whack with how things are quoted. And so we're trying to make sure that everything we quote isn't going to mess up our banking situation and how we have our cash flow set up. So we have that built in right to the sheet where we can look at it and go, okay, in an ideal world, this is how it's going to lay out. And based on how I've quoted it, like, for example, we're trying to keep 50% of our material costs or external costs going out, or less, 50% or less external costs. So if I've quoted it and my external costs exceed 50% of the total job cost, it'll show up as red, like it just as a flag to be like, hey, this is out of whack. If you've got a big job and it's a couple different parts, and some parts are in the red, some parts are in the green, then hopefully it averages out. But if it's usually a one part job, we'll look at that and go, is there anything we can do to lower our material cost, or do we quote this stuff low? Do we need to raise up our other costs? Because we try to keep that OpEx happy, because that's really the battle for us, is keeping our OpEx growing so the business can grow.
Do you think that how do I word this? So the way that you're doing your bank accounts and stuff is based on profit first. Mm-hmm. And that is forcing you into making some quoting decisions based on how your bank accounts are laid out. Mm-hmm. Do you think that is a good thing that is helping you, or that is like a hassle based on just how you've decided to lay out your bank accounts? Pro or
I
con?
think it's I think it's a pro. And the reason I think it's a pro, and I was actually having this conversation with another gentleman on Instagram. I think it's a pro because we could throw it all in one pot and operate the business and not look at any of that. The problem with that is that you have to break down every single job to figure out how you're actually doing. Because if we were to throw all the money in one pot, it would look like we were doing really, really, really well. Because we got a decent amount of money in the bank account spread out amongst all the accounts. But having it in the OpEx, it's a forced scarcity situation where it shows you the problem faster, and
Okay.
so it's kind of like it forces us to know really quick that there's a problem with how things are operating in the business because we're running out of money, and the only reason we're running out of money is because of external costs. And the only thing that is external costs is that OpEx account. So if we're operating a business and over 50% of the cash that's coming into the business is going out to external costs, then at least with how we have it set up currently, that's an unhealthy situation for us. And so now, granted, some of that money is so the way we have it broke up right now is we have 50% for OPEX, 30% for owner's pay, 15% for taxes, and 5% for profit. So in that 50 and that 30% for owner's pay, that's split between me and Weston, and we only get half of that. So ideally, the owner's pay account should be growing up because so we take half of that and then we split it half. So we only get a quarter. So we're only getting a quarter of 30% per week rather than the full 30%. Ideally, that account should be growing. The idea to be that it's going to create a even cash flow rather than a roller coaster.
Yeah. Is there a reason you don't just say, hey, my salary is X amount per month and just take that?
It's not high enough to do that yet. I could probably set it at a couple $100 a week and be fine. But doing it off the percentages, it kind of, I can also gauge how the business is doing by my weekly checks. So like all of like everything that we try to do, we try to make it act as a feedback for how the business is doing. That way we don't get in a situation where we didn't know what was going on. So I can look and see really fast. It doesn't take a couple seconds to know right where we're at. I can look at my statements. I can look at my account levels and instantly know how we're doing.
I'm trying to figure out if my business is different than yours or if like switching to your method would actually be helpful. The biggest difference between us is my material costs are fairly low. My
Yeah,
time costs are higher. I would, up until I started paying a bunch for advertising, I would say that our external costs were much lower as a percentage wise. That's probably still true. I would need to look at the. I've never actually added up like the external versus. Really, I should be saying labor cost for us. I am curious to see what that ratio is now,
yeah.
but I think
So
we're mostly like our biggest cost is me and Scott, like by a lot.
yeah. So in an ideal world, you want all of your accounts to grow at equal rates, and that means you have your percentages right, and that means you have a good understanding of how your business is operating. Right now, the only account we have to judge that by is OpEx because we're not too picky about owner's pay because we're getting owner's pay. Taxes last year, 15% was more than a healthy amount, and it actually gave us a nice kickback to so at the end of the year any excess cash went back into OpEx to help grow the business basically. So it was kind of a business savings account kind of, except it was dedicated towards taxes. So we were not allowed to touch it until taxes were paid, and after that, any excess um, can be distributed at our discretion. But it's kind of like forcing yourself to have a it's like overpaying and then getting money back every tax season.
Yeah.
So it's good to leave it like that, and then the profit account is nice because every 3 months we get a giant. Well, I say giant for us, it's huge, but it's probably only a couple extra $100 a week. or a couple $100 every 3 months. But it's a nice little kick that kind of gives us an extra large check. And hopefully, as the business grows, that profit kick grows. And so it just kind of everything kind of compounds. And ideally, what I'm trying to set up is I'm trying to set up the business where as we bring on more people, all the accounts are set up. Like for example, the profit account. And this is the whole idea behind the profit first mentality is if we get an employee after 6 months or to a year, whatever probationary period we set up, I'd like to start giving them profit from the business. And so same idea with the owner's pay account. Every time a profit payday comes out, we only take 50% of the profit account to kind of trade it a little bit level. And then of that 50%, we can distribute it out depending between me and Weston and future employees based off a percentage. And hopefully that by having it once every 3 months, it's not every week, so they're not an employee wouldn't be expecting it, and it's not every year. So the problem with having it too close is that it becomes expected. The problem with having it too far apart is that it's not on anyone's mind until Christmas or whenever bonuses are paid out. By having it on 3 month increments, it's not so far out that it's not on their mind, but it's not so close that it's expected. And that 3 months is kind of that healthy balance where, 4 times a year, you're going to get a profit check. And if we can get everything figured out, that should be a nice incentive or bonus or however you want to look at it to future employees to help them want to work with us. So
With your system, where do you account for growth? So for example, do you have a way of accounting for like, hey, I need to buy a new mill? Like, is that
yeah,
coming out of profits? Is that coming out of operating expenses?
operating expenses. Yeah. So that's where, so the way Profit First works is you can break up your business into as many accounts as you want. We've just put operating expenses in its own account. You could subdivide operating expenses into an account for just material, into an account just for employees, into an account just for tooling. Like you can break it out more. And as we grow, I would like to break it out into more. Like it would still maybe that whole umbrella of OPEX would maybe still cover 50%. As your business grows, your OPEX account grows with it and your owner's pay shrinks, but that's offset by the higher revenue of the business. And so we're still playing with the numbers and trying to figure things out. But in an ideal world, OPEX should be growing at a rate fast enough to cover any new expenses coming in.
Okay.
And
The
that's kind of how
way
we're judging it.
the way I'm handling that is, and I would love to get to more of a profit first system at some point. But
Mm-hmm.
basically, Scott and I have fixed salaries. That's basically the minimum amount we can get away with paying ourselves. Paying ourselves less than that wouldn't do us any good because we would just slowly, spiral into debt or whatever. And if we run out of money with paying ourselves the minimum amount, then I don't know, it's the end of the business. Like that's how businesses work. If you can't pay yourself, then
Mm-hmm.
business goes away. So I don't have a separate account for that or anything because I just, we always just get the minimum amount every time. And then I set aside money that I've been calling profit, but I don't know, maybe that's still the accurate term, but not in the way that profit first uses it. But every time we get money coming in the door, so basically I sit down and do this every Monday now. And I have all of my, the website and Etsy income set up to come in on Monday. So whenever website money comes in, we move 10% of that to this profit account. And whenever Kickstarter comes in, we just set 10 aside, we put in that profit account. And that is like our growth driving account. And then we have our other account that's our expenses account, which we do pay ourselves out of.
Yeah.
And
Now, here's a question. Are you set up as an owner's draw or are you set up on a payroll?
So right now, technically, I am taking owner's draw. Scott and I do not yet have a partnership agreement in place, so he is getting paid currently as a contractor,
Okay.
though we're working out a partnership agreement,
Okay.
which will then, I suppose, make it both owners' draws.
Yeah. Yeah. And see, the main reason we haven't gone to a fixed income is because it is an owner draw for us. And because we're going to go to a fixed cash flow per week once we have enough cash flow consistently to switch over to a payroll, which is probably going to happen when we get our first employee, whenever that happens. So that's
Here's
kind of the tipping point that's going to change us from owner's pay to a payroll system, is when we hire our first official employee.
so this is actually one of the things that I need to research and need to look into. When you are an owner of a business, you can't give yourself a normal paycheck. Well, as a partnership, I should say. Oh, you're an LLC, aren't you?
Mm-hmm.
Never mind, that's different. Because an LLC, well, yeah, can you give yourself a paycheck as an LLC, or does it have to be an owner's draw?
If you give yourself a paycheck, it has to switch over to a W-2.
Okay,
So you have to do a W-2
but then you're
for
being
yourself.
double taxed, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And so as an owner's pay or as an owner's draw, it's a pass through. And so it doesn't get taxed. However, it gets taxed with all of the business. So when the business gets taxed,
Yeah.
you're still getting taxed. When you switch over to the way I understand it is, in the beginning, owner's pay is cheaper to do because of the taxes. But as you grow, it becomes more expensive, and switching over to a W-2 becomes cheaper. And so I don't really know all the legalities behind it, but talking to our accountant, that's kind of how he worded it. He said, you want to, ideally, as the business grows, you want to get over to a W-2 as soon as you can. But to make that jump, you need to get up to a certain point where you can guarantee, because it's not as flexible at that point. At that point, you're locked in, and you can't constantly be adjusting it like you can with the owner's draw.
Yeah.
So
As a partnership, I don't think you can ever go over to a W-2. I think we would have to LLC for that.
possibly, and that's what we are. So we're an LLC partnership, whatever that is, something like that.
Yeah, that's a thing. Some states call it an LLP. Some states just have it as a special edition of an LLC.
Yeah, and that's basically what it is right now for us. So
we are mostly staying a partnership because my dad does our taxes for free.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, I'll do your taxes for free as a partnership, but I won't do them if you LLC. So it works out to do it that way. If we ever get to the point where we're hiring an outside accountant, then I'll switch to LLC. But really looking over it and like sitting down, there's not a reason for us to be an LLC. Like
no, I need to be an LLC. I need to be an LLC for the protection, because I'm doing job shop work and I don't really want to get sued to lose my house.
Yeah.
So.
Except most of the time you can still, like, I don't know if you've ever, like, yes, there is technically protections being an LLC, but they can still take your house. If you do anything that is negligent, then it is it's against you, not the business.
Yeah.
If you sign for a loan or a credit card, all of those are leveraged against you personally as well.
Yes, to some extent, yes. But there is more protection there than just being a partnership. I don't know all the logistics of it, but we had a lawyer set it all up. So we should be pretty well protected.
Yeah. I don't know. I've spent a lot of time like reading and looking into this, and I don't know. It just doesn't really seem worth it. It's not that much more complex from a tax perspective, but like it's a little bit, and like there's very little benefit.
So anyways, for us, that's how we set it all up in the beginning. But I probably need to sit down and look at all that stuff a little closer at some point. But it's been working out well so far. But yeah, I would recommend going to the profit first, because at the very least it can help you figure out your percentages. I would like to add more accounts, like I said, as time goes on. One of the accounts I would like to add is a savings account for new equipment. Like yes. You know, a 2%, 3%, like new equipment acquisition. It's just an account that grows, that if I wanted to put a down payment or something like that, I just have that money already set aside. And that's probably something we need to do at some point.
Yeah. That's I've almost spent my growth money a couple times this week. I almost bought a surface grinder. I'm still tempted to. The main reason I didn't is I basically only have one product that I would for sure use it on, and that product is still theoretical at this point. So even though it was a good deal, it's like, okay, I don't actually need this yet. I can always, send out a couple pieces for prototyping and then buy one if I need one.
Yeah.
But then the new thing that came up just like an hour ago or a couple hours ago is I found out the guy who sells wireless probes for the Tormach is back. He was
Nice.
all out of stock for like months. Otherwise, I would have bought one with my machine. That was my plan. And then he just went out of stock, and but he's back now.
I would love to do that because I'd love to play around with the probe more. Because
So I'm basically convinced that to buy one. I want you to check my rationale though. So one,
okay.
it's going to help me reduce waste because I will be able to do when I'm doing these longer like night runs. I will be able to do some in-process probing just to check things like,
Mm-hmm.
Is a part there? Is the part not there? Is a hole there that should be there? That kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, again, helping me reduce waste for things like the carabiner. For the carabiners, I'm making them out of plate. I am not facing off the top of the plate due to the warpage issues I was having
Mm-hmm.
constantly. There's not a huge amount of variation in the plate. It's plus or minus 5 thou, as best I can tell, or at least out of the plates that I have, they're plus or minus 5. But
Mm-hmm.
what that means is the biggest one is 10 thou bigger than the smallest one. And that is enough to screw up chamfers. And if I had the wireless probe, I could probe the part on the op2. I could probe each carabiner individually on op2 before it cuts the chamfers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that alone might be worth it.
Yeah. I think you could justify it. Although I don't think it'll pay back quite as quick, with the only exception being night runs. I think that's where you're going to see the biggest benefit. Because if you can guarantee success or reduce the risk of doing night runs, I think that'll pay for itself real fast. The chamfers and stuff on op 2, I feel like if you can probe all of that stuff while you're setting it up on the front end, it's not going to gain you much, because that's just part of your setup process. So like if you're setting it up and then you just probe them all and then you switch your tool, not as big a deal because I think you can do it all. I don't know your process on that, but if it's in the middle probing, then yeah, it'll make it faster. Because when you flip that stock over for op 2, can you probe everything? Like, could you go ahead and set up a probing routine as part of your first op or beginning of op 2?
I
Or do you think,
could. I would just have to stand there for an extra 5-10 minutes, whatever.
yeah, because like basically any probing that you can do at the very beginning, I don't consider that to be like it'll save you the 5-10 minutes to stand in front of the machine. But it's really any probing that has to be done in the middle of your program. That's the only stuff that I consider as justifiable gains rather than conveniences. Because if the
So let's see.
machine's right in the middle of, huh?
I was just thinking. So where else would I use probing if I could?
So for one reason I've thought about doing probing for the job shop space, I'll give you an example, and you can use this as well. Anytime I'm doing op 1 and I have a hat around the whole outside
Mm-hmm.
of the part, if I can set it up to where I can remove that hat and then probe against machining surfaces instead of having to do anything funky on the op 1 side to make it so, with drilling an extra hole or doing extra features, whatever it is to make that viable, or in some cases, measuring the jaws and the parallels and then trying to line up my part against an edge, that's where I see the biggest benefit in having a wireless probe, because then I can probe the top and then redefine it once I remove the hat off.
Yeah, I would use it on salami slicing parts to make sure that the part is actually no longer
That's another.
attached to the salami.
Well, you can use that for that. Yeah, that would be a great one right there. That's another good example. So
And
if you ever got to a point where you're Grimsmowing it up, where you could put screws in your fixture and you could measure your screws and have different programs wrote. That way,
that
if
would be
Scott was ever
nice.
running it, you could have him put different patterns depending on what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I need to buy this thing.
So there are legitimate benefits, but typically most of my probing I can do at the very beginning. And so I haven't been able to justify, and plus I figure I'm going to get a bigger machine and that one's going to have a wireless probe in it at some point. So I haven't been too worried about the Tormach. That said, I would be lying if I said I wasn't tempted. So,
If I get this, I will probe everything.
yeah,
Which
but
it maybe is an argument against it.
yeah, I was gonna say probing does not offset poor machining practices. So
Oh, it absolutely can.
it can help. It can definitely help, but
I have probed my way out of some really crappy setups before.
yes, you can, but that usually adds time and masks anything that you could actually do to make a better process.
Ooh, I
So,
do have another usage for it. I've never actually made a part on it yet because it's for an upcoming project that I haven't worked on yet. But I have a mag chuck, and locating the work on the mag chuck precisely is one of the problems.
yeah. Oh, yeah, that's a good example. Like, okay, this is just a general question about probing. Have you figured out how to do a coordinate rotation
Oh yeah.
in on Tormach? I haven't figured that out yet. So, like, if I put a piece of stock material in the Tormach, do a probing routine to change the axes.
Yes. There's basically one catch to it, and that's that you have to post the code to rotate it out of Fusion. Is there's no built-in Tormach rotation thing. You have to post it out of Fusion.
Okay, I have no idea how to do that currently.
It's really easy. It's just like making it any other toolpath, except you just like select the face that you want it to probe along and tell like what kind of probing you want it to do. If you want it
Mm-hmm.
to do a what they call like a long wall, which is where it'll rotate it, versus a just like touch off in the corner.
Gotcha. And it'll adjust it to where the rest of your program will account for it.
Yep, it'll rotate the whole thing.
Interesting.
You can give it like a G1 X1, and if you rotate it 45-degree angle, your machine will travel at a 45-degree angle.
That's weird.
Yeah, it's pretty bizarre.
Okay, and then the other question that I had, because I saw this old Tony do it in a YouTube video a while back, was he probed a grid on a plane that was non-planar and had all these weird shapes, and then he posted a 2D like engraving toolpath, and then he probed his surface and then was able to machine along that non-planar and get a good engrave.
That is a macro that existed in Mach 3 or Mach 4. At the very least, I had it on my old Tormach
Yep.
when it was still Mach 3. I don't know of any Path Pilot macros that do that, but being Linux CNC, like somebody may have made it, but it is like custom macro stuff. That's not built into Fusion.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Though it can do inspections now with the probe. Maybe you can do some sort of surface map. I don't know.
Yeah. That was something I was trying to figure out because I had a part that someone wanted me to engrave that I didn't really want to model and would have a hard time doing. I wanted to just set it in my machine, probe it because it was like a weird surface, and then engrave whatever they wanted. But I ended up turning that one away. But I spent a pretty hard time looking at it going, I know it
I
can be done, but
I can think of bad workarounds because I know with the probing macros, you can have it spit out a text file of points.
mm-hmm.
Though you actually, now I think about it, you may only get 1 point per text file, but you could theoretically do a grid of like 16 points that drive your surfaces, and I don't know.
Yeah. So, anyways, I think that's about all I got. I got a lot of big stuff in the works that I'm not ready to talk about yet, but there's some big things coming, and I really want to do a YouTube series or an Instagram story series on the products we're making because it's honestly a lot of work, but it goes by pretty quick because of all the processes we got in
Yeah.
place right now.
Ooh,
So,
I actually recorded a YouTube video for the first time in a long time.
ooh, have you
It
posted it?
was kind of a talking head lecture type video. I went over how to select an end mill for a job in more detail than the other videos I've seen. So like,
Ooh,
yeah,
go ahead and finish, and then I'll.
it's like the difference between aluminum cutting end mills and steel cutting end mills, and like when you need a big gullet and when you need little gullets, and when
Nice.
to go, 3 flutes for steel versus 6 flutes and all that fun stuff. I got pretty into the weeds.
I figured out how to do a. Is it called a herringbone, or what's it called? The
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 herringbone
thread
gears.
thing. No, not gears. That's what I'm thinking of. But no,
The Higby?
your the thing on the thread where you
The
remove
Higby
everything up to a
threads?
huh
The Higby
Higby
threads? Yeah.
Higby. I finally figured out how to do that on the lathe. So I haven't
Oh,
tested it
nice.
yet, but I know how to do it now. So I just need to test it.
I know how to do it on a mill when you're thread milling. I don't know
Hmm.
how to do it on a lathe.
So I know how to do it on the lathe now.
Something with there's like a Saunders Machine Works video on this that I could not follow. Probably mostly
Yep,
because I don't have a lathe. Something
that's
about
the one.
duplicating the threading toolpath and using
Part off tool
a
or
part off
groover
tool.
or groover.
That's as far as I got.
Yep, it makes complete sense to me now. So that's the one of the annoying things about Fusion is that you have to fake it basically, and that's
Yeah.
what was throwing me off. So
Can you store it as a template though once you fake it once and be able to
yes,
pull it up later as long as it's the same size thread?
yes.
Yeah, I've been loving Fusion templates more and more recently. Like I have one for 440 threads where I just like pull it up and it as long as I make the holes the right diameter, it just like automatically selects them and automatically selects
Hmm.
them for both the drill and the tapping operation and has the height offset right for the drilling deeper than the tap and it's like, "Oh, I should have done
Yep,
this a long time ago."
yep. Okay, got anything else?
I'm going to buy a probe. You have me convinced.
Okay.
I was already convinced. I was like,
I
if
was
you
gonna say
had
that
gotten
didn't
on
take
here and just
much.
yelled at me not to do it, I wouldn't have done it. But
I won't yell at you not to do it. I will yell at you to check to make sure you can afford it right now. But apart from that, I do think you will need it at some point. Um, so my biggest thing would be, I think you should look heavily into that profit first because it kind of forces you into better money management, if that makes sense. So at least consider it
okay, I feel
heavily.
like I could manage money poorly with any system.
You probably could because you still have to do it.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't magically go into all those different accounts. Once a week, Weston will take all the money that's come in from the prior week and he'll divvy it out based off the percentages into all the accounts. So he's been doing that. And so I just get a little weekly report of how money has been split. And it makes it really easy and digestible to do it that way. So,
Yeah, makes sense.
well, thank you guys for hanging out with us for this week's podcast. Please tell all your friends yet again about us. And we'll catch you all next week. This is Harrison with Precision Ingenuity signing out with AJ from Design to Everything.
One of my favorite parts about having a soundboard now is when I'm like tired and ready to go to bed, I can just press this button and it forces Harrison to do an outro. Anyway, bye.
Okay.